Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Nightcap. Grab a drink, kick back, and relax. I'm your host, Shane Barrett. You can find me on Twitter at FFShaneB. And joining me tonight is your rotating tap, Mr. Nathan Polvogt, who's with so many people. We'll let him talk about that in just a minute. But before we do that, how you doing tonight, Nate?
I'm doing great, man. It's been a good start to the week. Nice Monday. It was almost 80 degrees here, which was phenomenal. Of course, it's going to rain for the next 2 days. So, yeah, man, I'm good. Stoked to be here. It's my only appearance this week. Taking a podcast live stream vacation the rest of this week, I think.
Nice. I'm not happy with you because you're sending the rain my direction, and somehow it always rains on Thursdays when my wife is taking our kids to dance class. So I'm blaming that on you today, Nate.
Oh, whatever. It's fine. I'm magic weather guy over here.
You are magic weather guy. All right. And then, Nate, joining us today is our special guest, Mr. Dave Kluge with Footballguys. And you guys should follow him at Dave Kluge. Dave, how you doing tonight?
Doing great. Much like Nate, I was just enjoying the weather. Nate and I, we only live about an hour away from each other. So,
nice.
Woke up this morning. It was freezing cold. And then I went outside to get something out of the car. And I said, wow, it's really nice out. And I took my shirt off and I played in the backyard with my dogs for a few hours and got some sun. And, it's crazy what a little bit of vitamin D can do after a long, long winter. So I'm feeling great tonight.
Absolutely. I'm ready for it to be consistently sunny here. Go take walks downtown and whatnot. I live in Greenville, South Carolina. I don't know if you know that, Dave, but we've got a suspension bridge in the middle of downtown. Yeah, over the Reedy River, and times. I love it. So kids love it too. So that's always fun.
No, that Greenville's a beautiful place. My aunt and uncle moved out there with their 4 kids a while ago that are right around my age. So they all got married in Greenville. So I have been to Greenville for 4 weddings and love it. It's awesome. such a cool city.
Absolutely. If you're ever down here, hit me up. We'll go grab a beer or something.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So tonight we are actually going to be discussing our whole show is actually based off of an article that you wrote, Dave, last year with the 0 wide receiver draft strategy. I really enjoyed that article, and there was a line in there that we'll talk about in just a minute. But before we get into that, we got to do the regular segment. What are you drinking? And Dave, as our guest, we'll start with you.
I'm drinking some Kraken spiced rum. It's all I had in the house. I've been taking a little break from drinking lately and scavenged the bar, and that was all I was able to find that I wanted to drink. Outside of that, it was a bunch of I had a maraschino liqueur and some grenadine, and this seemed like the only thing that was reasonable to drink on the rocks tonight.
That's fair. Nate, what about you?
I'm keeping it simple, man. I got a Coors Light, local,
beautiful,
crisp, clean, under 120 calories. So,
oh really? I didn't think I knew that. I thought Coors Light was higher than that.
No, it's pretty low. It is. I'll tell you in a minute here. It is. I can't tell you. Never mind. I thought I could.
It's okay.
It's lower calorie than an IPA. We'll just put it that way.
Touche. That is a very fair point. And tonight, gentlemen, I am drinking out of my Noel Christmas cup that I got from Target, Maker's Mark and Diet Coke, because I'm watching my girlish figure. So,
well, all right then.
All right, gentlemen, you ready to jump into it?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right, so I already alluded to this, but Dave, last April you wrote an article on 0 wide receiver drafting. Do you like this strategy in Dynasty?
No, quite the opposite, actually. That is a redraft specific strategy that I use, and I think I alluded to that in the article, but just simply it comes down to the shelf life. I mean, running backs are great, but we see it all the time. I mean, you look back just 2 years ago at who the top 10 running backs were in Dynasty, and all of these guys now have fallen out of that spot. So no, this is just specifically for redraft. And really, when I'm drafting in Dynasty, I don't know if I necessarily lock myself into a set strategy. I really like to target wide receivers and quarterbacks. But really, it just comes down to whatever drops to me. some of the best advice I ever got when it came to drafting in Dynasty was from Mike Liu, who I'm not sure if you saw just announced his retirement actually, but he
No
quoted
way.
Bruce Lee. He did. He is stepping away from the fantasy football world.
Wow.
Yeah. So very, very disappointed. Mike's a good friend, but you got to do what makes you happy. But he quoted Bruce Lee when talking about draft strategy and said, "Be water. You got to play the board as it comes to you." And that's something that I learned. If you try going into a draft with a preconceived strategy and this is what I'm going to adhere to, you're going to end up chasing the end of runs and you're going to burn yourself. So really, you just got to look at how other people are drafting. And when they zig, you zag. You just try to do the complete opposite so you can get that good value at every single round.
100%. And that was actually the line that I wanted to point out that you put that in the article was people don't get locked into that set draft strategy when you start a draft, because I think in the article you said you could come to the end of a round and have Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams staring at you. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to take that here.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing is, and I always look at strategies as a guideline. There's, I want to get as many running backs as I can early, just because I feel like that gives you a really big advantage in redraft. I mean, one of the big things is just that workhorse running backs just simply don't exist anymore. I mean, it used to be every single team had a guy that was going to get 300 carries. So there were 32 guys that you could basically choose from that you can plug in as your RB1 and your RB2. And now you've got like 5 of those guys. And in that article, I have a graph where I broke it down, or a chart that I broke down by the decade. And it's just every single decade, that sample of guys that are hitting every threshold, 200 carries, 250 carries, 300 carries. It just keeps going down and down and down. So I think that if you can lock in 2 of those workhorses, that's what I want all the time. Every single year I look through who are the guys that I think are going to be a lock for 300 touches. And I want to get at least 2 of those guys on my redraft roster.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate, how do you feel about 0 wide receiver in Dynasty?
So I've been pretty vocal about the fact that I'm kind of not a hard, rigid strategy guy. Like Dave said, and I really liked what you said, Dave, is where I go into a draft where I'm thinking, this is how I want it to go. But many times, everybody else in your draft has a strategy too. And when you're in a 12-team league, one of those managers is bound to have a similar strategy to you, because there aren't a whole lot of different ways to really draft if you're doing your research. So, I go into it like, once you get past that first tier of guys, for me, it's kind of a whatever game. I did a Dynasty startup draft, which I know is different, but I'll be using a similar strategy where I'm taking running back and wide receiver early, even in Superflex. I landed on Derek Carr and Ryan Tannehill as my quarterbacks. Didn't take a quarterback until the 6th round. And I'm okay with that when I've got, like you said, Dave, I've got Jonathan Taylor. I've got Nick Chubb. Those are guys who are going to get that high-level carries, and I know those are points. So I'm okay with Derek Carr. And now that's looking even better, getting him in a later round. It's probably not going to be the case towards the season. But just fluidity. I'm okay with 0 wide receiver if it benefits me based on the league I'm in and drafting in.
Yeah, and I think another thing too is that running backs are so affected by situation that like a guy who's a stud running back one year could be a bum the next year and then go back to being a stud the year after that, just based on where he's playing and what his competition is. Or with wide receivers, you know what you're going to get a little bit more. Even right now with Tyreek Hill going to the Dolphins, he's taken a slight ding, and Jalen Waddle has taken a slight ding. But imagine if, like you said, Nick Chubb was traded to the Colts and suddenly Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor are sharing a backfield. Those guys aren't going to be able to put up elite numbers individually. So not only is the shelf life longer for a wide receiver, but also the talent is a little bit easier to evaluate, and it's able to stand out, where running backs are a little bit more dependent on their situation.
Yeah, totally.
Well, and I think something too with when it comes to wide receivers, the situation I'm just going to point out real quick, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase.
Yep.
As to, you can't have 2 running backs do that, but you can have 2 wide receivers in a system do it.
Mm-hmm. Which is actually, and I think I may be in the minority with this, but I think that could be in where Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle end up. Now I'm a Tua guy personally, so that's why I think it. So I know other people aren't as fond of Tua, but I think these guys, especially with their yak ability, fit well with Tua, and Tua is capable of throwing the deep ball. He just doesn't do it a ton. So, Dave, you kind of yeah, you could. Well, actually, no. What's your preferred strategy in Dynasty? It's just being water.
Being water, yeah. I mean, just
Okay.
playing the board as it comes to you. So just I'd say probably the strictest rule I have, at least in a dynasty startup, is that I want to get 2 quarterbacks in my first 3 rounds. And I know that's the opposite of what Nate was just talking about here, but I like getting those young, really high ceiling quarterbacks
Mm-hmm.
to anchor my team. But just as an example, I was doing a startup recently where everybody, I had the 11th pick and 9 of the first 10 picks were quarterbacks. And then it got to me, and I'm sitting there at 11, and I said, well, I'm not going to pass on Jamar Chase here. And then coming around to me in the second round, there's Justin Jefferson. So, I had to stray away from what I like to do and what I'm comfortable doing and taking quarterbacks. But, that value is just too good for me to pass up. Like, I'm not going to not take Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson in the first and second round there. So, just playing the board as it comes to you, as corny as that sounds. Even another example is I like to kind of avoid running backs within the first few rounds because they're so volatile and they can fall off so quickly. But Christian McCaffrey fell to me in the early 4th round in a startup recently. And I said, well,
Oh
I'd
my
be
gosh.
crazy not to take Christian McCaffrey here. And,
Right.
I strayed away from my avoid running backs early because of the value that fell to me.
Yeah.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends because, like, if you're in a tight end premium, like double premium league, I mean, you're taking Travis Kelce with the first pick because you're talking about 3 points per reception.
Mm-hmm.
That's different. It's important to know your league settings too when you're going into a draft. I mean, that should change a lot of things for you. If it's not just like a typical 6 points per touchdown, whatever, 1 point per 25 yards for the quarterback type scoring.
Yeah, no, totally. All right. This question, this one just makes me hurt, to be completely honest with you. Nate, we're going to open it up to you first. What are your thoughts on zero running back?
I've tried it a couple times, last offseason. It depends. I'll never do. First, I'll start off with I'll never do it again because I just ended up with nothing at running back. I made poor decisions in later rounds. There are things I could have done to have improved my status within the league if I'd done better at drafting some of those late round running backs. But when you start getting to those late rounds, it does become a crapshoot because, like Dave said, a little change in situation and you can watch a guy's value plummet.
Mm-hmm.
An injury, maybe the offensive line isn't playing as well.
Free agent signing
or free agents, like things like that. Yeah. Zero running back. Like I would, if anybody's listening to this and you want like my biggest advice, don't do zero running back. It is so risky. It's like playing roulette or like sitting at a craps table. Like it's a roll of the dice.
Dave, what about you? What are your thoughts on zero running back?
So I've never really committed to a full zero running back build because when I think zero running back, that's the guys that are waiting until the 12th, 13th, 14th round to take their first running back.
Yeah.
And that is insane to me. And I mean, some people can do it and it works for some people, but that's, I like having a little bit more stability than that. And yeah, you can get lucky and stumble into Rashad Penny and Donta Foreman and plug them in and take off. But like I said, I just like having the stability. So typically I'll have specific guys that I'm targeting in every single round. And if they drop to me at a good value, that's where I'll pull the trigger. But usually, I don't know if this is considered zero RB per se, but for me, I usually start looking at running backs in the 5th and 6th round. That's about when I'll start eyeballing running backs, 5th and 6th round of a startup. I've usually got 2 or 3 guys in mind there. And if they fall to me, great. And if not, then I've got guys that I'll pivot in the next rounds and hope that they fall to me.
Who are those guys that you're targeting in the 5th and 6th rounds?
I am glad that you asked. One guy right now that I just can't get enough of. I don't understand why he is sliding the way that he is, but Travis Etienne. I have been taking him in the 6th round in almost every single startup that I'm doing. I mean, this guy was the RB2 last year as a rookie. And yes, he broke his foot with the Lisfranc fracture. And that doesn't have the best rate of people coming back to 100%. But the one indicator that does help people come back from that injury is youth. The younger people are, the more likely they are to bounce back from it. We saw Julio Jones bounce back from it and put up 5 straight seasons with 1,300 yards. We saw Marquise Brown fractured his Lisfranc joint before his rookie season, and he came back without missing a beat. So I am optimistic that Travis Etienne is coming back. And last year, he was getting drafted in the late second, early third, and all that happened is he was injured. He's still in the same exact position with arguably a better team now, a better coach, more offensive weapons. So that is a guy right now in the 6th round that I can't get enough of. But if somebody takes him a little bit earlier and I can't get to him, then the next kind of tier that I look at in rounds 8 to 10, there's a group of guys that I really like there. Elijah Mitchell, AJ Dillon, Isaiah Spiller, Damian Harris, James Conner. So I'll start pulling the trigger on those guys in the 8th to 10th round. And those are guys that I just really, really like. James Conner is probably the one that stands out from the bunch because he's a little bit older than the rest, but him having that Arizona backfield all to himself, he is just going to be an absolute beast. But I've made it through there before where I also cannot get those guys as well. So the latest I have ever waited on a running back one was the 11th round, and I ended up with Tony Pollard and Ramondre Stevenson in the 11th and 12th. RB1 and 2. And I'm not crazy about those two, but then I loaded up with guys later. I got Alexander Madison, I got James Cook, I got Gus Edwards, I got Keyshawn Vaughn, Chris Carson, Jared Patterson, Justin Jackson. So really what I'm hoping is that, one of those guys is going to be a serviceable RB2, and then one of those other guys can be thrusted into a starting role due to injury, and then I've got 2 running backs for the season.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if Carson can stay on the field, he's easily an RB2, if not an RB1.
And he's going in the 16th round right now. The 16th round.
Yeah. I feel like I just got
that's
him
crazy.
Real close to getting him in a startup. And it was stupid late. I was like, why is Chris Carson still available right now?
Recency bias. People look at his injury history and they don't want to touch it, and which I get, but he's not the first person in the history of football to have spent a few seasons getting injured and able to actually. I mean, look what Rashad Penny did at the end of last season. Why can't Chris Carson have a full season? We know he's capable of it. And Dave, I know he's one of your favorite running backs out there. You love Chris Carson. I do too. If he's on the field, I was high on Rashad Penny coming into this offseason because he was a free agent, and I didn't believe that Seattle would re-sign him. They did. I'm lower on Penny now because I believe that Carson takes that work as long as he's on the field.
And we've still got summer camps to open up, and right now what we're hearing from the Seattle beat reporters and Pete Carroll is that he should be a full go by camps, and that they're expecting him, and that his surgery was successful, and that he's at 100%. But that could also be coach speak. I mean, the reason he's going in the 16th round right now is there's a chance that he gets cut in a few weeks, and then other teams look at him, he can't pass a physical, and he never plays football again. So there is that
fair. That's
bottomless floor that is baked into his value as well.
Yeah, that's fair.
Dave, you mentioned AJ Dillon as one of your guys in the 8th to 10th round. Another guy that I know you love this year, and right now I'm loving him too, is Aaron Jones. Where are you comfortable taking him?
I've got them side by side in dynasty and redraft rankings. Redraft rankings, I give the slight edge to Aaron Jones, and in dynasty rankings, I give the slight edge to AJ Dillon. But had you asked me this question a couple weeks ago, Aaron Jones was pretty much off my draft board. My fear was that he was just going to slowly start losing work, and that they were going to use the out in his contract after the season. I thought he had 1 year left in Green Bay, and then he was done. But now with Devontae Adams gone, we're looking at a completely different situation for Aaron Jones. I tweeted out recently, the sample size isn't huge, but in the last 3 seasons, there have been 7 games that Aaron Jones has played without Devontae Adams. And in those games, he's seen almost 8 targets per game. He's averaging 26 points per game. If you extrapolate that over a season, he was scoring more points per game than Cooper Kupp did last year in the 7 games without Aaron Jones. So, I mean, I really think that Aaron Jones is going to be looking at the next 2 years without Devontae Adams. He'll stay in Green Bay, and I think he can consistently be seeing 7 to 8 targets per game. So the fear is that he's 27 years old, and we see that age cliff approaching quickly. But yeah, I mean, I've got him just outside of my RB1s in redraft, and I'd be pulling the trigger on him comfortably in like the 6th or 7th round right now. If I miss out on Etienne and he's there, I'll gladly take Aaron Jones.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Nate, what do you think about Aaron Jones this year?
So I just did my first rankings today on Fantasy Pros, actually. I like Aaron Jones. I think he's good for 100 plus targets. in that offense with Davante Adams gone. I think he becomes a pretty marquee part of that passing game unless they do something crazy, which I don't think they're going to do. This is a team that historically doesn't draft wide receivers early. Maybe they go out and get a Jarvis Landry, but Aaron Jones is still probably one of the best targets in that offense. I like him to finish as an RB1, probably in that RB1 tier next season. I think, and this is going to sound crazy, but I think AJ Dillon could realistically finish in like a mid to back end RB2 tier area. I think it makes sense with what this offense is now. Aaron Rodgers is older. You don't want to push it on that shoulder. He has had injuries in his throwing shoulder before. You lean on guys like Aaron Jones, and then you're going to really like bump that run game. And AJ Dillon's kind of the power back in that offense.
Mm-hmm. I think right now, because Davante Adams is gone, everybody is kind of scared of Green Bay, just all of the Green Bay pass catchers. Right now, at their current values, I think that AJ Dillon, Aaron Jones, and Allen Lazard are all going to smash their current ADPs. And everybody is thinking that there's going to be an odd man out. And I think that all three of these guys can happily coexist in Green Bay. Like you said, with AJ, or I expect Aaron Jones just to be playing out of the slot. He's going to take on much more of a receiver role, which is what he's most comfortable at and translates to a lot of fantasy points. AJ Dillon is going to be the early down goal line back, and he could see 15 to 17 touches. And then Allen Lazard, I won't go off on that tangent. I've already talked about it enough on Twitter and written articles and talked about it enough on shows. But I think Allen Lazard, the stage is set for him to have a monstrous breakout as well.
So I'm curious, Dave. I want to know where you're at on Robert Tonyan. How do you feel about him coming back from injury?
So I've got and this is kind of the crazy thing is, I went through the projections with the Green Bay offense, and you can project career highs in targets for Tonyan, Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, Amari Rodgers. If they draft 2 first-round rookies and Aaron Rodgers throws more targets to both of those rookies than he has ever thrown to a rookie wide receiver in his career, there are still over 200 targets available up for grabs between Allen Lazard and a free agent or whoever else. So, I mean, I think that Robert Tonyan is going to see about 80 targets. I think Aaron Jones is going to see about 100. I think AJ Dillon's going to see another 40 or 50. And I mean, just by trying to do projections for the Green Bay Packers, even if they see a decrease in pass volume, there's still easily 120 to 140 targets up for grabs for Allen Lazard. And it's just kind of mind-boggling that people don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
I think it's crazy too. I mean, I've been on the Lazard train. I like him. He's a great receiver. With Adams out of the way, like really go get him at what his value is right now in Dynasty, because it is not going to be this low again after he blows up in 2022.
Mm-hmm. And I think a big thing too is that Aaron Rodgers really, trust is so important to him, as corny as that sounds. But Randall Cobb, Davante Adams, Jordy Nelson, none of these guys ever cracked 1,000 yards within their first 3 seasons. I mean, this is just kind of what Rodgers does. He like slowly grooms and develops these receivers over time. And then what we saw is the pattern where it was Greg Jennings was the guy. And then Greg Jennings got hurt and Jordy Nelson stepped in as the guy. And then Jordy Nelson went to, ironically enough, the Raiders. And then Davante Adams took over. And now Davante Adams is gone. And it's just not in the Packers' MO. It's not in their blood to go out and make a splashy free agent signing or to bring in rookies. They just are going to have the next man step up. And that could be Allen Lazard. It could be Amari Rodgers. It could be Robert Tonyan, but I'm putting my chips on Lazard.
Well, and Dave, you kind of made my point for me there, because there's another person who is no longer there. And yes, vacated targets aren't real, whatever. Rodgers has to throw the ball to someone. Adams and MVS are both gone. Mm-hmm. So I think while vacated targets aren't real, it does open some doors for Amari Rodgers to step up, which is what I'm hoping for as a Packers fan. But also, I don't think they make that deal for Adams to get that second first-round pick this year without some kind of concessions or agreement with Aaron Rodgers to go draft a wide receiver in the first round. I'd be shocked. Just because what we've seen with Rodgers so far has been like, you guys haven't been, you traded up and didn't tell me about Jordan Love. You haven't been drafting me receivers, blah, 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 blah. Fine. Davante Adams is going to walk. I get it. He's expensive. He's worth it, but he's expensive. I feel like there had to be some kind of concession or agreement made that they were going to go draft somebody with one of those 2 first-round picks. I'd be shocked.
I mean, a lot of mocks have Chris Olave from Ohio State going to Green Bay.
I mean, they've got 2 firsts. They could walk away with Garrett Wilson and Drake London or George Pickens. And I mean, they can go so many different ways, but I mean, that's like, in the article I wrote, I projected the worst case scenario for Allen Lazard is them taking 2 first-round receivers and Rodgers throwing more targets their way than he's ever thrown to rookies before. And, Randall Cobb seeing a bump in usage, Jones, Dillon, Tunyon, everyone's seeing a bump in usage. And there are still hundreds of targets available. I mean, I don't think they're really taking notice to how bare bones this Packers offense is right now. I mean, there are 4 guys there from last year, and that's
it. Yeah, no, I definitely have as a Packers fan. It's like, oh shit. Who is he gonna throw the ball to with Adams gone now? Like,
and the thing is, even with all of that, Rodgers' value hasn't taken a ding. Like, people still know it doesn't matter. Like, you could throw a bunch of janitors out there, and Rodgers is still going to find a way to throw for 3,500 yards and 30 touchdowns. Like, he's just that's his baseline.
Yeah, I mean, you could throw me and Nate, who are both under 6 foot, out there, and he'd probably still find a way to hit that.
Dude, I screwed up my throwing shoulder raising my hand on a podcast last week, like to the point where I couldn't get above here for like 4 days. So my quarterbacking days are done. I'm basically, I mean, I could probably like go to Philly and maybe get some passing stats there above and beyond Jalen Hurts because he can't throw. I'm kidding. Jalen Hurts is way better than me. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing to me that Tom Brady's 45 and he's killing it, and I'm over here like getting up the stairs, man. I just like might have pulled a hamstring.
Dude, I don't know what I did, but I've pulled a Baker Mayfield and hurt my non-throwing shoulder, and it's just like if I lift my arm above here too fast or even like just at the wrong angle, it's like, oh sweet Jesus, I'm about to fall down and die.
Oh no.
So yeah, it's not fun right now. I'm going to the chiropractor to try and figure that out. So yeah. All right. That's enough talk about zeros. We're going to transition into some best player available, tier-based drafting, bully tight end, and late round QB. So I feel like tier-based drafting has become slightly more popular, probably up there with zero RB. Dave and Nate, how do you guys determine your tiers when it comes to drafting?
I wish I could say that I had some sort of like method process, but really I go with my gut. I built my own rankings about 6 years ago. I downloaded consensus rankings and I just started tweaking things. I think this guy's too high. I think this guy's too low. And that has just been a running project for me for the last 6 years now. So I don't, I do go with my gut and I do some basic projections that help me kind of formulate some opinions. But really it's just something that I kept as my personal rankings and then just recently started to share. The one thing that I think kind of gives me an advantage is when I started in the industry, it was doing news correspondence. So I was incredibly plugged into the news, get to find out the tendencies of different beat reporters and learning to read between the lines. When a coach says this, they could really mean this. And I think being able to kind of get ahead of the news before it happens, knowing how teams operate and trying to project what their next moves are going to be in the offseason and how that's going to impact value of other players. I think that's kind of where I get my edge. So, I've got a decent understanding of, data and analytics, and I've spent a lot of time to learn more and more about that. My biggest edge when it comes to building these tiers really just comes from my gut and being just plugged into NFL news nonstop for the last 15 years.
Bo over here coming in hot.
Bo coming in hot. Well, he started with this, but I threw this up first. He said, hey, and then Thieves. What's up, Thieves? And then we got Mike Hicks in here too. Dave, it makes me so happy that you actually said that in the way that you said it. So I actually started my dynasty rankings 2 years ago. And I've got a little model or whatnot where I weigh the different attributes that I use to rank them. And like I would say I'm new to it because again, it's only 2 years old. Yours are 6 years old, so I guarantee you've got more process and thought and analysis into it so far. But I haven't determined how to determine my tiers yet either. Like, I'll probably go in and end up looking at like, okay, like these guys are like a 4.8 to a 4.6, and that'll be like tier 1 or something like that, and end up doing it a little more analytically that way with the numbers. But that's the thing about rankings and tiers and whatnot that I've learned from doing it just for 2 years is you can adjust those and figure out what makes sense to you and what fits in your drafts. And that's what I really like about it.
Yeah. So I mean, for my process, I mean, this isn't really talking about tiers, but you know, a lot of people have a data first approach, and some people have a film first approach where they kind of take grades. And what I do, and this sounds crazy, but I have kind of a hunch first approach where I'm just so plugged in that I'm like, you know, I think that this might. I kind of develop this theory in my head, and then what I do is I start looking at the numbers, and sometimes the numbers, you know, corroborate my hunch. And I'm just like, holy crap, I'm onto something here. And that happened last year with Deebo Samuel. And I said, Deebo Samuel is set up for a huge breakout. It happened in 2019 with Lamar Jackson. It's kind of the same take that I have right now with Alan Lazard. On the flip side, though, I've had hunches before where I start digging into the numbers and I say, you know, maybe there isn't a strong correlation here. And then I've even had some instances where I start digging into the numbers and I completely changes my opinion. And I say, wow, you know, I wanted to try to prove this right, but I ended up, you know, landing on a completely different conclusion. And now this is where I'm going with it. So I think for me, it's just kind of understanding narrative and how football works, how coaching works and all that. And then kind of working backwards through the numbers and seeing if that will either back up or completely disprove my theory.
That's interesting because that's very similar to kind of how I end up laying out all of my analysis. Like, we're people who know football. Oh, God, Joey. I love Joey. Always throws me off. I will read your comment in a minute, Joey. I'm just so. I mean, for me, when I'm looking at anything, there's always a measure of statistics, situation, some level of like film study and analysis, but there's always a gut feeling. And I think that comes with anything that you do in life. You can take all of this data, you can read all of these articles, see what all the talking heads like us have to say about a certain thing. But at the end of the day, you have a gut feeling. For my gut feeling tells me that I should never, ever, 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 ever draft Kirk Cousins. And I don't. And it's worked well for me. I just don't like the guy. And I know that he's a good quarterback. I understand the merits of drafting him. My gut tells me I'm never going to take him. I will not ever have him rostered unless there's a dire situation where I have to get a quarterback and I have to trade for him. It's not going to happen for me. That's a gut thing. But that's just kind of like, I feel like that's a big part of this. Like you said, Dave, how long have we been watching football and paying attention to football and pining over football? A lot longer than we've been analysts. It's been our life. So we have a certain understanding of how this game works, whether we played it or not. And at the end of the day, that's the thing that's going to tip the scales for me when it comes to making a draft pick in a draft. Gut. I'll have 3 guys I'm looking at, and my gut tells me I'm between Robert Tonyan, Hunter Henry, and Logan Thomas. My gut says take Logan Thomas, which it probably would never actually do, but I'm going to take Logan Thomas. Well, no, I'm just like throwing names out here.
Well, Nate, I think what you're also describing is kind of a price thing. Like, there are certain guys that I won't take in drafts because their price is too high, or I like other people at their price. And price being relative to draft capital, obviously. So I think that's another thing to talk about or think about when you're drafting is like, let's say you've got 2 guys where ADP is pushed one way up and has dropped the other way down. You're going to want to take the one that's been dropped because they're probably a better value or a better player. And sometimes hype can get a bit out of control. So, okay, now let's read Joey's comment real quick. What he's learned so far from this episode. Nate and I need Pilates. Dave was wild and half naked in the backyard. I did catch that too. That was a very interesting comment, Dave. We can maybe visit that later again.
Like I said, I got to get vitamin D, and I want it on more than just my face. I need it everywhere. Short shorts and no shirt.
Sun's out, guns out, right?
Yep.
Skies out, thighs out.
Of course.
And then no intentional position strategy, rocks and Packers RBs are close. Very fair. Mike
summary.
throwing shade at me, needing more than a lot of Pilates. And then Joey again. I've read it helps with back issues. I've never done a Pilates, let alone multiple Pilates. Joey corner.
I want to throw one more thing out there, though. When we were talking about the process a little bit, and I was trying to think in my head like of a situation where I actually have a hunch, and then I go back and look at the data, and it makes me change my mind. And I think the glaring example for that last year was DeAndre Swift. At the end of the season, I was completely off on DeAndre Swift, and that was my gut telling me don't draft DeAndre Swift because I had drafted Kerryon Johnson and Amir Abdullah and Mikel LaShore and Javid Best and Kevin Jones and all of these guys that were highly drafted Lions running backs that just screwed me. And then over the course of the entire offseason, the more I looked into it, I said, you know what? I just got to get on board with DeAndre Swift because this guy's the real deal. And by the time draft season rolled around in August, I was drafting DeAndre Swift everywhere. So that was, I was trying to think of one of the situations where I had a hunch. And then the more I looked into it, it kind of made me pivot a little bit. And that was the one that I could think of.
What about, so I'm putting you on the spot here. What about the other way? Have you had a hunch about someone that you were like, I got to have this guy, and then digging into the data and the film has actually turned you off of him?
Not that I can really think of. Usually the guys that I'm high on, I feel like I have pretty sound reasoning to be high on guys. When I'm fading guys, it's usually a like guttural, like I hate them and I can't explain why, but I don't really feel that way when I'm pumping up players. Like Derek Carr. Derek Carr's another guy. I was so off Derek Carr, and then Adam Harstead over at Footballguys. One day I just tweeted out some dumb cheap shot about Derek Carr, and Adam Harstead reaches out to me and he goes, hey man, like you should look at this. I wrote this article and I started looking into it, and I was like, well, wouldn't you know it? Derek Carr is actually a pretty darn good quarterback now, and he's been putting up fantasy points for the last few years, and now I am on the Derek Carr bandwagon.
Nice.
I was solo going into Derek Carr this offseason. And I wrote a piece on him, and I initially went in to say that he was a dynasty free agency faller. But then I looked at what they were doing and what the team was doing. And dude, I'm on Derek Carr now. I was off of him, Dave, and man, you shouldn't be off Derek Carr.
No, you shouldn't. Well,
you should be on.
I'm glad you guys are here now. Welcome to the party.
I see Bo in the chat here too, saying that I pivoted on Pitts, and I want to say I think I kind of hit my Pitts.
Elaborate on that, please.
what I didn't like. I was completely off Kyle Pitts last year because I said he's not going to have a good rookie season, and I didn't expect him to just put up 1,200 yards and suddenly be the number one overall pick. And wouldn't you know it, his ADP now is still exactly what it was a year ago. He hasn't appreciated in value whatsoever. I was off of him in redraft, and he finished as a middling tight end 1. But really, what's the difference between like a mid tight end 1 and like a back end tight end 3? Like really, it's just a handful of touchdowns. I mean, Pitts, if you drafted him in redraft this year, it wasn't a good feeling. And now I'm going out and acquiring him because he hit that threshold as a rookie. He had a phenomenal rookie season, and he didn't generate the touchdowns, but he had a great rookie season, one of the best rookie seasons ever for a tight end, and his value didn't budge whatsoever. He's still getting drafted exactly where he was last year.
Yep, I love it. Absolutely love it. All right. This was a great conversation, but now I'm completely lost on the show sheet. Okay. I actually like this question a lot, and we've talked about it in different ways tonight, but I want to ask it specifically this way. And Nate, we're going to start with you on this one. How do you create and use positional scarcity when drafting?
I mean, to be fair, I don't really try and create it or use it. I go with the flow of the draft. And I do what's best for my team. I'm not necessarily trying to like screw anybody else in a draft or shift anybody else another way in a draft. If there is a positional run, though, I will continue that positional run sometimes if I already have a need at that run. And it might not be a situation where I'm like, well, I have to get this guy now or I'm not going to get him. It's let's see if I can make people keep drafting tight ends that they shouldn't be taking this early, because I know I'm going to take this guy anyway. And if this run continues, I come around on the turn, I still get the guy I was going to take with my last pick anyway. I mean, and that's just like having fun, because most of the leagues you're in with people you know. So,
yeah, that's interesting, Nate, because when I read this question, I thought it was a very interesting question. And the first thing that popped into my mind was taking advantage of positional scarcity by being the run breaker. You don't want to be the guy that's chasing runs. And that's how I interpreted the question, is if I see 6 people taking running backs ahead of me, I'm not going to keep hitting on that running back train, because I know that the value of those running backs is quickly depreciating. I'm going to grab a wide receiver that I have in that same tier and break that and let everybody else, as the running backs are slowly diminishing in value as everybody's drafting them. That's when I'll pivot and take a receiver or a tight end or a quarterback.
So the one time that I actually drafted 0 running back was because I was doing exactly that. I was zigging while people were zagging or whatever. And I ended up with DJ Moore, AJ Brown, I think DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, and maybe Justin Jefferson, all on one team in a dynasty league. Now that league folded. My running backs were hot garbage, but I had 5 potentially dynasty wide receiver ones on my team, and I was just like, "Come on, like let's go."
and I did that in I was in Sleeper Bowl this year. I don't know if you saw that, but it was with some fantastic analysts, Scott Fish and Ryan McDowell, Evan Silva, and everybody was going running back crazy. It was a redraft league, and I am typically a guy that goes very heavily after running backs in redraft leagues, but everybody else was doing that. So, we've said zig when others zag quite a few times on the show, but that's exactly what I did. And I ended up with George Kittle, and I ended up with 3 tight ends with my first 4 picks. And because everybody was going so bullish on tight ends early, I was able to get DeAndre Swift and I can't remember who my RB2 was, but in the 5th and 6th round, I ended up with DeAndre Swift and Damian Harris as my RB1 and 2.
Nice.
And those guys were plug and play all season, and I got them in the 5th and 6th round.
Nice.
And it's because at that point, everyone had their running backs. No one else was drafting running backs, and I was able to just keep picking them late.
Yeah, I love that. And Dave, I don't know if you great segue to our next question. Which tight ends do you guys try to pair if you're using a bully tight end strategy?
I'll do bully tight end in best ball, but as far as long-term question marks with almost every one of the top tier dynasty tight ends right now, I am not really comfortable taking anybody in that top tier outside of Kyle Pitts. And if I can get Kyle Pitts at the end of the first, early second, great. But outside of that, you got Travis Kelce. He's 32 years old. Darren Waller, he's going to be ceding his alpha role to Devontae Adams. George Kittle, he just disappears. Like Kyle Shanahan will just scheme him out of the game for 3 or 4 weeks. Mark Andrews, when you look at his splits with Tyler Huntley and his splits with Lamar Jackson, and then you look at his, expected wins above replacement, he had an insane touchdown rate that all kind of boosted his value a little bit. So for me, I'm not really doing bully tight end right now in Dynasty. I'll take Kyle Pitts, but really my favorite is kind of that mid tier, which they say is always a trap. But TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert, Pat Freiermuth, these guys might not have that, mega elite ceiling that the other guys in that other tier will, but I think that they're relatively safe. They're young, and they're going to have, consistent tight end 1 seasons going forward. So I like that tier. And then I'll also wait a little bit longer. And I love this tier. Albert Okwuegbunam, Evan Ingram, Irv Smith. A lot of times I will just take 1 tight end early. And then once I get to that late tier in the 15th, 16th, 17th round, I'll take 3 straight tight ends there.
Yeah.
Nate, we have guys like Dawson. We have guys like Dawson Knox going later. You have Dalton Schultz. For some reason, people aren't hopping on him early, which they should be. Cole Kmet is valuable. He finished as a tight end 2 without a touchdown last year. And I think that says that he's due for a huge bump. I may or may not think he might finish as a tight end 1 in 2022, but we'll see how that
Someone's got to catch
out.
patches in Chicago.
Right? Look, exactly.
Okay, I'll make the case for you, Nate. Cole Kmet, he's a year 3 tight end. He's a Notre Dame tight end, and he's got a second-year QB who I think will target the tight end. And like Dave just said, here's number 4. They've got Darnell Mooney, and then who?
Aaron Bringle.
Yeah,
I would
thank
take
God for
Cole
Byron
Kmet over
Pringle.
Byron Pringle.
Equanimous St. Brown. So I heard you say, though, you called out Notre Dame tight end. Who are some other notable guys from Notre Dame? The only one I can really think of is Tyler Eifert.
Kyle Rudolph before him.
Oh, that's right. All right.
Yeah. Rudolph fell off a little bit, and I mean, he's still in the league, I think, but he was really good if I remember correctly. Yeah. He's with the Giants now, but when he was with the Vikings, I don't know if he was a tight end one. But yeah,
he was a big red zone presence.
And Eifert was a beast before the injuries piled up.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. He really was. And then, just because I'm a Notre Dame fan and I know he's coming, Michael Mayer, baby Gronk, he's coming. If you can get those 2023 firsts,
I thought Adam Shaheen was baby Gronk.
There's been a lot of baby Gronks since
A lot of baby Gronks. Yeah. Everyone wants to be baby Gronk, but nobody is baby Gronk.
Oh, and Bo brings up a very good point. No Nagy is a huge upgrade for that entire offense.
That is true.
So, all right. Next question for you guys. This will probably be our last draft strategy that we talk about is late round QB. Who are some guys, if you are going to do a late round QB, that you are going to target? And I know, Dave, you said this is kind of the opposite of what you do. So I'm going to make you think real hard. And you can even give me a redraft answer too.
So I got to say, I don't think late round QB is the way to go anymore. And I had JJ Zacharyson on my show last offseason, and I asked him, and he said that as well. You know, he wrote his book back in, I want to say it was 2016 or 2017. It was a while ago. And the landscape has changed so much. We have just, as a collective, as the fantasy industry has gotten so much sharper at being able to find those breakout quarterbacks. And I think like the one exception in recent years has been Justin Herbert, who is a generational passing talent that I don't think anybody saw coming. I mean, this guy was ranked as like a QB4, QB5 in his own class. He's kind of the outlier there. But, you know, at the end of the 2020 season, I immediately was beating the drum for Jalen Hurts. And I was like, this is going to be the guy. He's going to be a league winner, da-da-da-da-da. And he was getting drafted as the QB7, QB8. I mean, people have become very privy to knowing that you want to draft these young quarterbacks with rushing upside. So it makes it really hard to get those late round guys now. And it's, you know, we saw it with Patrick Mahomes. He was, you know, the late round guy that was a league winner. We saw it with Lamar Jackson, late round league winner. And since then, we've almost over adjusted in the market now, where I feel like Justin Fields, Trey Lance, these guys are already valued pretty darn close to their ceiling because people don't want to miss out on them. They're able to recognize the upside. So now I feel like the pendulum has swung to the point that we are overvaluing the guys with massive upside. So I guess there is a case to be made for waiting, but you know, it's just, I feel like if you're waiting, you know what you're getting. You're getting a vanilla quarterback like Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr that's going to put up low-end QB1 numbers. If you want that upside, you've got to draft one of those guys early. You got to get your Josh Allen, your Kyler Murray, your Deshaun Watson. And if you don't want to pay up for that, you just got to be content with low-end QB1 numbers.
I mean, we're the league, Dave, you're completely right. The league is at a different point. Quarterback talent isn't what it was 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. You've got these guys who are so dynamic and so many of them. And you've got a community of fantasy football managers who sees all this happening. And we've gotten much more intelligent at drafting quarterback. We understand that a guy like Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, they're going to be more valuable. So once you get to that second tier quarterbacks, there's kind of a major fall off there, which is why I've seen a trend of people who in super flex leagues, they'll take a second and a third quarterback. But a lot of times you see them rolling out a running back or another high-end wide receiver they maybe reached a little bit on in the draft in that super flex spot. Because we really do. Like, we know what quarterback is. When you get into that second tier, it's not great for fantasy.
Yeah. And I mean, you even see it now with some of the rookies that are coming in. Like the draft community is not that crazy on Desmond Ridder. I mean, Desmond Ridder is probably going to be a day 2 pick, but you've already got fantasy football rankings where people are putting him as their QB2 because of his rushing upside. And like, people are already going buck wild. And I'm falling for it, man, with Malik Willis. I just drafted Malik Willis in the 3rd round of a startup. And you're doing it solely on the upside. And like, you know, we're already probably drafting this guy pretty close to his ceiling, but it's something that people are realizing how big of a difference it is. Like, I mean, that is a cheat code. When you have one of those quarterbacks that can put up 27, 28, 29 points a game, that really makes a huge, huge difference. So people are, always trying to get ahead of the curve, getting that next high upside quarterback.
Well, I think so. I love Malik Willis. Just real quick, I just want to say this. He's a guy who needs to sit for at least the first half of a season before he sees the field, if he's going to be successful. Otherwise, we're looking at a Josh Rosen situation where this guy gets absolutely ruined and is out of the league essentially in 4 years. Nobody knows where he's actually playing because he's at best a third string quarterback.
Let me throw another one out there. Justin Fields. Justin Fields was a guy that was supposed to sit for half a season. A lot of people were saying that he'd come in week 8, week 9 or whatever. And then all of a sudden, Andy Dalton gets knocked out with an ankle injury and Justin Fields is thrusted in when he was not ready. And I mean, we might see something similar with, and that's why I think Justin Fields right now is such a great value. I don't think he was ready last year. Now with another offseason of prep, I think that he's going to make a huge step forward, but we might even see that next year with Malik Willis, where, maybe he gets drafted to Atlanta. Atlanta he drops to them at 8, or they trade up to get him, whatever it is. And then Mariota could twist an ankle week 1. And then all of a sudden Malik Willis is thrusted in there, not ready, not developed. He's got to play for his life. And then his value plummets after that rookie season. So, people are just, we've gotten much better at knowing where fantasy points come from at the quarterback position. And it makes it really tough to get that edge now.
So you must have read my mind, Dave, because the question I was going to ask was this. I feel like this entire draft class, except maybe the wide receiver position, has been deemed weaker, especially with the quarterbacks. So my question was going to be, do you think that this rookie class causes a swing back the other way? But you already answered that with what you said about Willis and Ritter.
Yeah, and those guys are already flying off the board. And then you better believe that if, Matt Corral or Sam Howell get a little bit of draft capital, people are going to be going goo goo gaga over them too. I mean, it's just what
I'm
happens.
already goo goo gaga over Sam Howell. If he and Malik Willis are the only two that get round 1 draft capital, I said this on on my show last week with Heath Cummings, I may be stubborn enough to keep Sam Howell as QB1 of the class.
I don't hate it. I'm pretty sure Christian Williams is there. I've seen a few people that have Howell as the QB1.
Yep.
We're not even talking about Pickett. It's another guy that could be going in the first round.
If only his hands weren't so tiny.
Look, Dave, we already talked about it earlier. Nate and I are both smaller, or both under 6 feet tall. Nate, I don't know about you, but I've got bigger hands than Kenny Pickett.
Yeah. I also have bigger hands than Kenny Pickett.
I'm under 6 foot as well. Nate and I are about the same time, and I measured my hands out, and they are also bigger than Kenny Pickett's.
Yeah.
But look, dude.
It's going to be a problem.
Doug Flutie had a relatively successful NFL career. The dude's 5'7". Joe Burrow's hands are smaller than mine.
Drew Brees.
Dude.
Burrow was still 9 inches, though, right?
We're talking about hands?
Yeah.
Yes, I hope so. It'd be weird if we weren't. Oh.
Wow, that went off the rails fast. All right. So my last question, and I think I know the answer to this, but have either of you had any success with going
Joey.
Thank you, Joey, for bonking us with the horny dog bonk. Have any of you had success with a late round QB draft strategy?
2019, Lamar Jackson. I had Lamar Jackson everywhere, and
nice.
Haven't really had a late round QB hit like that since. I mean, Mahomes, I picked him up off waivers in my redraft home league in 2018. But like I said, because of Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, I mean, it has just really, really changed our perception on young quarterbacks.
Yep, totally. What about you, Nate?
I mean, I can't think of one specifically, but I make the playoffs a lot and I go late round running back. So I mean, I've had success with it. It comes, I draft higher at other positions and quarterback takes the hit on it. And I'm okay with that. in most leagues, depending on the scoring. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I recommend it, but yes, I've had success with it.
Yeah. I'm tooting my own horn here. I made the championship game in the Fantasy Wildcard Dynasty League, and my QBs all season were Jared Goff and Teddy Bridgewater. Now,
that is ugly. That is so ugly.
It was a 14-team Superflex Dynasty, and I made the championship game with those two. Now, here's the problem. By the end of the season, they were both hurt. So I think in the championship game, I started Tim Boyle and Drew Lock. So currently, my team name in that league is Locked On Boyles.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But it was fun. All right, Dave, we got a little bit of time left, so I want to do a little bit of advice and get to know you for our listeners and viewers. So first question for you, Dave, is when did you start in the fantasy industry?
It was about 2018. I started writing for Fantasy Pros, and for a couple of years before that, what I was doing was just anonymously writing articles on Reddit. And then one day, somebody from Fantasy Pros reached out to me, and they said, "Hey, you've kind of got a knack for this. Would you like to start writing at Fantasy Pros?" And me not knowing anything about the fantasy industry, I was like, cool, I'm going to be Mike Tagliere by next year. Like that's what I was expecting. And no, I was as low on the totem pole as you could possibly be, grinding out articles, news blurbs, I should say, for 50 cents per news update. And I didn't even start with football. I was writing football content on Reddit. That's where they picked me up. But when I started at Fantasy Pros, it was writing basketball. And then I was upgraded from basketball to baseball. And then I was eventually, after 2 years at Fantasy Pros, I moved from basketball to baseball. And then I finally got my shot doing NFL content prior to the 2020 season. And that was Dan Harris. He told me, he said, "Hey, man, you gotta get on Twitter." He's like, "If you're creating football content, there's this huge community of people, and you need to start sharing your stuff out there." So I hopped on Twitter about a month before kickoff 2020. Had never done a show before. Just kind of tweeted out, "Hey, looking to start doing some football stuff," and ended up doing a podcast, ended up doing some live shows, and and here I am. It's been a wild couple of years.
Awesome. And you are a rising star for sure. Best piece of advice for someone trying to crack into the industry?
Well, I say this on shows all the time. I want to be where I am without luck. I mean, just plain and simple. There is a lot of luck that you need to. I just, for whatever reason, caught Joe Bryant's eye, and we hit it off, and he reached out to me, and it took a long time from him following me until I got a job at Footballguys. But you also have to put in the time and the work and the effort, and I think a huge thing is just being kind and avoiding the drama. And I can't speak for every company, but I know that, if we're looking to bring people on, one of the first things we do is we mention that person, and people start browsing through their Twitter. And if there are shots taken at other people and drama, and there's more of that than there is actionable football content, a lot of people have lost opportunities and they don't even realize it because they are getting more consumed with the drama than they are with the content. So my advice is just to avoid drama, be kind, work hard, and an opportunity will find you eventually if you do those things. And I happen to find the opportunity a little bit sooner than other people have, and I realized that there's some luck there. But I think a big part of that was also me just working hard and trying to consistently keep my face out there and write articles and network as much as I can and try to make as many connections as I could.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree with you on the be kind part of it. Joey. But no, I completely agree with you on the be kind part of it. That there you never know what people are going through on a day-to-day basis. The worst I don't know how to word this, but the best thing you can do is just be kind, because you could make someone's day just a little bit better, and change someone's life even, by saying a kind word or two.
I got sucked into some of the toxicity last offseason. It was my first full offseason in the industry, and it just became something where like I wasn't on Twitter or anything like that, and then all of a sudden, it's something where I'm just plugged in 24/7, dealing with thousands of strangers in this community, and I definitely got pulled into some of the toxicity. And, I kind of had an aha moment where I said, this is not worth it. And I kind of stepped away, and I feel like I've been pretty drama adverse since, but it's just something that, people learn over time. But yeah, I mean, that's my biggest advice to anybody is just avoid the BS, because all it's going to do is hold you back.
Yeah, totally agree. All right. Little more fun question for you. What is your number one fun fact about you, Dave?
People watching the show probably already know this about me. I know Nate knows it about me, but I love climbing mountains. That's it's just this weird itch. That's what brought me from the Midwest out to Colorado. There are 58 peaks in Colorado that are over 14,000 feet. My wife and I were a little bit over 50% of the way through climbing all of those. Our honeymoon was not your typical honeymoon. Most people want to go get pampered and massaged and drinking, flowery drinks with umbrellas in them. And my wife and I didn't shower for 2 weeks, and we lived out of our car and camped on the side of mountains and, cooked our food over a fire. But that's the stuff that we like doing, especially with how, tech intensive this job is, where you're just sitting in front of a screen all the time. We find it very important to set aside that time where we aren't going to have a phone in front of us. We're going to be completely unplugged from Wi-Fi and cellular data, and we're just going to go disappear in the mountains for a couple of days. And, I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with us. Maybe we're a little bit sick. We like the pain of just pushing our bodies to the absolute limits. But that's my fun fact is we are all about mountain climbing, rafting, rock climbing, all of it.
Okay, I got to do some quick math. But that means, because you said there are 58 and you've done half of them?
I think there's 56. Yeah, and I'm at 29 right now.
Okay. So 29 times 14,000. Son of a bitch.
Well, this is what a lot of people get confused about. You're not climbing from sea level up to 14,000. So you can do that if you go to Alaska, if you go to Vancouver. But a lot of the times these trailheads are starting around 8,000 to 9,000 feet. So typically, like the biggest ones I've ever done, you're gaining like 7,000 feet in a day. Okay. And yes, Joey is coming out to visit in June, and I told him that I'm going to drag him to the top of a 14,000 foot mountain. I'm going to be a Sherpa. Awesome. I'm going to carry all the beers and sandwiches and everything in my bag. He's just got to show up and walk, but he's doing it with me.
Well, now wait a second. I didn't know this service was available, Dave. I'm in.
You're a Colorado native. You can pack your own stuff, Nate.
Yeah, that's fair. Fine.
All right, gentlemen. Well, that wraps up this show. Dave, thanks for coming on. I had a blast, and loved getting your perspective on kind of how the different draft strategies that are out there. And I think the theme from this episode will be water. So, Dave, before we go, anything that you want to plug, and everyone make sure you follow Dave on Twitter at Dave Kluge.
Yeah. Thank you. Just the nice thing now is I don't have to plug a bunch of stuff anymore. I'm exclusively over at Footballguys. So that's what I get. Follow me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. Find all my content at Footballguys. So that's it.
Awesome. And Mr. Nathan Polvogt, where can people find you, and what do you want to plug?
So you can find me at Nate Polvogt on Twitter. All of my stuff's in my bio on Twitter. Check me out on Fantasy Pros. I'm starting up with Trophy Smack. In Between Media. It's my baby. Check me out there. Yeah. That's about it.
Yep. And everything will be in the show description on YouTube. I don't know if I'll be able to get it on Anchor because they have character limit. YouTube's is not nearly as suppressive. But then you guys can follow me on Twitter at FFShaneB. This is the Fantasy Nightcap live, and you can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Nightcap. Make sure you guys sign up for Polly's Playoff, a tournament to end Alzheimer's. It is a super flex tiered PPR redraft tournament. $10 donation for an entry fee goes directly to the Alzheimer's Association. And this is the Fantasy Nightcap, where we serve you fantasy advice straight, no chaser. Cheers.